Hey everybody, and welcome to Difference Makers. My name is Pastor Tyler Warner from Calvary Chapel in Trussville, Alabama. Today we are continuing our series on writing and publishing and the fact that we need your book. We need what God has given for you to write. We're going to be talking about a lot of practical matters today, but before we get to that, I want to remind you about ironworks.media. Calvary Chapel Trussville is building the premier Christian resource network. BGTV is a big help at that as we make this Difference Makers show here, but this is not the only thing we got going on. We've got other podcasts. We've got books, including this one behind me here, The Desolation of Israel, and the new one that just came out called Firebrand. Firebrand, which is a missionary biography that you are not going to want to miss. You can find all that at our website. If you join our mailing list today, you can download 2 free short ebooks and be up to date on all the things that we are releasing. Got some cool stuff coming up next year. We're already planning our conference for 2026. It's going to be great. And if you want to find out more about the church where I pastor, you can go to calvarychapeltrussville.com. Okay, so we are halfway through, I think, our series on writing here. I just finished releasing the newest book. Our church has done 2 book releases this year, The Desolation of Israel and Firebrand. We're already looking for next year on how we can try to continue this process, keep it going. We've done 5 books before, and I thought it would be interesting to take some time. This podcast is all about being motivated and inspired to live the life that God has called you to live. For me, that includes writing. At least part of that includes writing. And while I try to apply this to a wide range of things, I thought it would be fun to take some time and drill down specifically and to look at the kind of effort and the kind of attention that needs to be given to one aspect of something that God might call us to do. In addition, I meet people all the time when I tell them that I've published books or that we got a new one coming out who have asked me for advice or what do you think I should do? I hear so many people say, I've got this idea I've worked on, or I've kind of got some chapters done. I don't really know where to go from there. And a lot of people have asked for advice on editing and publishing, and we're going to be talking about some of that today. So this is a very common thing that people feel that God has called them to do. Very interesting thing, I think, to talk about, and I think it'll also be an example for us as the kind of attention and detail that is, in fact, spiritual and should be leveraged for whatever domain God has called you to be in. So we've already talked about coming up with the ideas, pre-writing, getting that together. We've talked about the actual drafting process itself, getting the words on paper and finishing the book. And today, right now, we're going to be talking about editing, the editing process. There is so much anticipation that goes into writing a book. Before you get started, you're daydreaming, you're in the shower, taking interview questions about what it's going to be like. And maybe you've been thinking about it for a long time, sitting on this idea for a long time. And it takes a long time to write the first draft of a book, to get it from once upon a time, all the way to the end. That is a long process. And when you finally get to the place where you write the end, that is an electric feeling. Obviously, it's not the whole process that we're going to talk about today, but for me, when I take a picture to commemorate finishing a book, it's the moment when I finish the draft, the first draft, when now there is a book that I have written that exists. And that's an amazing electric feeling. But it can be deceptive because we can think, now that I finally slayed the dragon, finally conquered this thing, wrote it down, got everything on paper, that I'm done. I'm finally finished. When the answer actually is that you're not even close to the end. That is the beginning that allows you to start producing something that we're going to call a book. Once you actually have that first draft, while it feels like a big accomplishment, and it is, I would even say that might be the majority of the work you've got to do, there's another step to the process, and it's an indispensable part of the process called editing. It's time to take that giant manuscript that you've got and whip it into shape. I know a lot of people that love to write who skip this process. They will write a book, and when they finish it, they say, well, that's it, the end. And they'll either try to publish it then or try to release it then, and it never really seems to go anywhere. Or they'll just kind of shelve it and put it away because they don't want to do any more work on it. Sometimes people will say, well, I edited as I went, which we all do that. That's not special. I was editing as I went. But I'm here to tell you, this is a process that you cannot skip. It's not enough to make your book a quality product to just write it, finish it, and say, I'm done. And I understand very well the motivation in your heart to say, but I want to be finished. I got the biggest part down. And yeah, you probably do think you got something pretty good there, or you wouldn't have gotten all the way to the end. But I'm trying to tell you, you must do the editing. This is no one's favorite part of the process, but it cannot be skipped. And even if you are going to invite other professionals to help you out, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there's a lot of more work for you to do as an author, even before you can get to that step. So I'm going to go through more or less how I've gone through this process. And even if you don't do it in this order, these are the kind of things that you need to do after you finish the book. You've written the end. Now you got to go back and turn it from a manuscript into an actual book. And my first piece of advice here would be to take a break from it. To take a break, to stop working on it for a while. I know some people that are crazy, and they say you should stop working on it for a year or more and come back to it totally fresh. I don't think that's a good idea, but I do think several days, several weeks, maybe a month can be very, very helpful, because what you're doing is, first of all, just taking a break and catching your breath from this long process. Usually it's a sprint to the finish at the end of a book when you're writing the draft, so you probably have been working hard and long hours. Take a break. And what will happen while you do that is the back of your mind will start to work on this. I can say this is true about sermon preparation, for example. I'll make my notes and print them out and have them there, but then I'll usually go for a walk for a while after that. I try to do that on Wednesday nights, especially when there's less time for me to prepare, because your mind will start bringing up things that you need to work on. That point doesn't really flow. Oh, you wanted to say this, and you didn't get that in there. Did that illustration really work? And the same thing is true to your book. And you'll have some moments where you'll just be thinking, man, I can't believe I finished that thing. That's good. But then there'll be other times where you go, oh, that chapter though, that one piece, that one scene, or that one argument, I don't know if that really scans well. Then you need to pay attention to those thoughts. What are the things that keep on coming up as maybe needing extra work? You've probably already identified in the process some problems with it. You've probably got some uneven bits. If I were to ask you, what's the weakest part of your book, the weakest part of the story, or the weakest argument in your theology, or whatever it is, and you probably know the answer to that. So you know that it's not good enough. It's not good enough to release. And maybe you think that it is, but what are the parts that are nagging your mind? Those are signals that you'll learn to listen to. It's also important just to get distance from this thing so that when you go back, and you should go back, and you will go back, you're prepared to get after it. I would say when you start getting the itch, wait for the itch to finish it, to die down, and then when it comes back again, then it's time to get back after it and get to work on that book. So the first thing I say is take a break from the book. The second thing is your first pass through is you've got to do a read through of the whole thing. Now, I just finished a book, which that's a different Desolation up here, which was pushing 100,000 words in length. It ended up being less than that in the end, but it was a long book. And the idea of just reading through it was kind of intimidating for me. And that may be the case for you too, but this is really something that must happen. You have to read through the book with minimal stops. You may stop and tweak a sentence there if you catch a typo, or move a paragraph around. You can do little things like that, but I really would like you to limit that step of the process for right now, because you're trying to get a sense not for what you want it to be, but what is this thing that I have here? Does the story flow? Does it make sense going from one thing to the next? Does the argument track? Are there scripture verses, for example, that you forgot to include? Are there any out of place sections that you kind of hit it and your brain sort of goes, oh yeah, that part's in there. Why is that in there? And I would say, as you're doing your read through, you should expect to feel pretty sick to your stomach after a while, because you're going to realize this thing is really not that good after all. And it's a shame that it is that way, but it is the case that you're going to see all the problems. That first read through, you're not going to have any of that glow left of what it is and, oh, it's so good, I really think it's ready now. You're going to read it again and go, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm doing. This was a disaster. Well, it's not a disaster. What you're going to do is read through the book, and now you can approach it objectively, and you can have a list of obvious problems that you've got to go fix, and keep a list as you write them down and say, all right, we're going to go back and we're going to fix that. When I read through my books, I'm usually making some changes as I go, but I try not to make any big structural changes because I need to know what I'm dealing with before I try to fix it. And also, if you feel like something is weird at the beginning, but you haven't seen where it leads in the end, then maybe you can change something that really needs to be in place for later. So I recommend your first pass through, just read it through as best you can without touching it if you can manage that. The second pass through is what I'll call the hack and slash. This is when you need to go through the book, editing like we typically think of editing, where you are making big changes. And this second step needs to be repeated as often as is necessary. You'll probably do this around a dozen times before you move on to the next step. But this is real editing, and it is not as fun, because the fun of writing is just watching the words flow and hearing the story come out, or watching, the argument take shape, or feeling it as it all starts to come together. What's not fun about writing is stopping and having to fix structural problems, or figure out why that sentence doesn't work, or does this paragraph belong here, or should I move chapter 3 to chapter 8? Like, those things are not fun, at least for me. And that's what this whole process is. This whole editing process is just coming to the book like a product that you've got to fix. Remember we talked last time about separating in your mind kind of the roles that you're playing here? As an editor, you're coming to this book and saying, this idiot doesn't know what he was doing. I'll fix it. I'll change it around. You're going to be eliminating long passages. You're going to be changing sentences around. You might even write whole new chapters. I think I said last time, and some points going through the writing of the last book, deleted tens of thousands of words at a time. It just doesn't work. It's got to go. The whole thing is on the chopping block here, which is why that objectivity is helpful. Figure out what is going to make the book work, not what is going to make you happy. And I highly recommend during this process, don't add things, delete things. Delete things, because more likely, for way more people, it is more likely that you have written too much and you've got to cut things than you have not written enough and you've got to flesh it out. You will find parts that you need to flesh out, but sometimes that part that seems really lean is actually what you want. That's actually the proportion you want. So if you can cut the fat on some of the bits around you, it might not look so bad, and you maybe only need to add a sentence or two or something. So cut first, then add things. You're going to find sections in this process that are great. You love reading them, but they just don't fit in the book. This is what is famously called killing your darlings, meaning a section that you really like and you think is really good, but it just doesn't fit. And as much as you love to keep it, it's got to go. Get rid of them. And you're going to do this several times, as I said, until the book is finally whipped into shape. And as you're doing this step of the process, you're not trying to make it perfect. You are trying to get the shape right. I don't know much about sculpting, but I'm going to use this as an illustration anyway. The first draft is just kind of getting all the clay together, more or less what you want. And then the first step is, evaluating, just kind of tweaking, okay, I know what I need to do. Now what you're doing is you want everything to be the main shape that you want it to be. That at this point, all we're doing is refining. It looks the way we want it to look. And this is what you want to do when you come out of this step of the process is the book is what it is. The chapters are not going to change anymore. I'm not making big structural changes. The sentences are more or less where I want them. That's what you're looking for. So that you can come to the third pass through. And again, these things can be repeated multiple times, but this third step here, which is the language edit. The language edit. This is when you are not fixing the story, you're not adding characters, you're not changing plot, you're not adding new sections to the argument, you're not coming up with new thoughts that need to be put into your nonfiction book or anything. This is just working on the language. If you're taking that sculpture and you're refining the details, the nose is where you want it, and it's the general shape that you want. Now it's time to make it look detailed, as if I know anything about sculpting. But I'll tell you what, this language pass is skipped by a lot of people. There are many people, especially I find, who write fiction, who care more about the content of what is being said, the plot, the world building, than they actually do how the book reads. You get the other kind of people that obsess over every sentence, even though the book stinks. You've probably seen a few movies like that. And it can be true for Christian books too, where guys kind of feel like refining the language is to sort of limit the Spirit for some reason, although you don't think that the Holy Spirit was very particular about what his authors wrote down when he was writing his book. So you don't want to skip this. You've already fixed the content. You got everything where you want. Now you're trying to make it look and sound beautiful. A book is like a song, and I've done songwriting too. Maybe one day we'll do a series on songwriting. But it needs to have flow, and it needs to have beauty. One of the things we often say in songwriting is every section needs to add something. You should never have duplicate sections that sound exactly like each other. You got to add something or do something different. In the same way, every chapter, paragraph, sentence needs to have something that is pleasing to read and pleasing to listen to. Now, when I'm writing a theology book, that's going to be very different than me writing a story, right? If I'm writing a theology book, I want it to be pleasing to read and listen to, but it also is trying to do something different than telling a story. But English is a beautiful language. I'm not a big fan of people that like to dump on English. English is a beautiful language. We've got so many words available to us. We've got so many phrases, so many ways of putting things, so many great authors that have come before us that have shown us how this can be done. You've got to learn how to use it. It's very common for people to be excited about writing a book, but they're not very excited about the language part of it. This is where grammar comes in. This is where spelling comes in, although that's less so. It's picking the right word instead of just a word. You'll find that you repeat certain phrases a lot. I have a tendency at the beginning of paragraphs to say, and yet, I noticed. And I had to go through another and yet, get rid of it. Say something else. Say however, say but, or just delete it entirely. You don't need it there. You've got to learn how to do that. One other piece of advice I'll give you is to eliminate abstract language, meaning you don't want to be talking about economics is an abstraction, okay? So you can talk about economics, and you can talk about trickle-down theory, and you can talk about free market, and you kind of get all these things so built up in one sentence that nothing concrete is ever happening. Pastors can be really, really bad about this because we're used to speaking a certain way, and something that sounds good when you're preaching it might not sound as good when you're writing it down. So, we're going to say, we want to have a move of the Holy Spirit. That sounds really good, but when you write a move in the book, it kind of looks strange. Like, what is he saying there? That's just one simple example there. But you're trying to clarify. That's what you're going for. Every sentence should be smooth. It might not be all beautiful, but it should be smooth and clear what you're trying to say. I find that for this process, reading out loud is very helpful. You don't want to get in the zone reading your book and you're skipping paragraphs. Read it all out loud so you hear how it actually sounds when it's being read. So that's pass 3, is your language pass. Once you've done this, it is time to pass it on to somebody else. Here's your next step, is to pass it on to other readers for help. Some people like to bring in readers very early in the process and hand out chapters as they come. That's fine too, but it's certainly in the editing process, this is the time to bring in what are called beta readers. This will give you, first of all, more time away from the project to think about it, think it over. Is it working? Is it the way I want? See what's niggling in the back of your mind. Is there something else that I just haven't fixed yet? When I give the book away to people, if I finished it and kind of got it in a reasonable shape and the details are pretty much what I want, I'll tell people I'm looking for big picture opinions. I'm not really looking for nitpicks. I'm not looking for typos. It's the most common thing I get when I hand people a copy of my book is they give me a long list of typos. And I'm like, that's great, but I can catch those. What I'm looking for is the book good? Is it interesting to you? Does it catch your attention? Do the arguments flow from one to the next? What was your emotional response to it? And the best thing I can hear is when people say, I kind of stopped paying attention and just read it because I was so interested in it. Well, that's really good. That's what you're looking for. Ask questions like, would you read it if it wasn't mine? And make sure you give them plenty of permission to tell you that. Don't get all hissy fit when if they say, I don't know if I would. You're going to have some people who are just going to say nice things, so you got to dig a little deeper. Take the compliments. They're being nice. That's why you chose them. But you also need to say, okay, but what could be better? That's a great question. What could be better? And they might have some things that they can tell you. And maybe you had some concerns yourself. Like, it just seems like when we hit around 2/3 of the way through, it just kind of dies off and it's not really interesting there. Or you're writing a story and go, do I really need this whole character here? I mean, I'm trying to find ways to put him in and he's kind of funny, but he doesn't really do anything. Well, just say, hey, I'd like you to read this book. And as you read, let me know how you think the pacing goes and how you think all the characters fit. And then when you meet them later, you can say, around 2/3 of the way through, did it feel like it stalled out for you? Or you ask them, this character, do you think he's necessary? Because you might get somebody who says, oh yeah, absolutely, it was great. Or you might go, now that you mention it, and then that's how you know you've got to make a change. And if you hear from a lot of people, I usually do this for 3 or 4 max, no more than that. If you're hearing consistent complaints, like they're all saying it's hard to understand, if they're all saying the language is too fancy, if they're all saying they're not sure if this chapter is necessary, they're probably right. And you need to consider taking another look. Don't get your feelings hurt. This is a field test, and it's necessary. And you can sit there and blame the people reading it for not recognizing your genius, but it's probably more likely that it just needs work. It's not as good as you thought it was. And you may choose not to make changes based on what some people have said. I remember I wrote one of my fiction stories, and we come to the ending, and this person said, no, it should be more like this. And I remember thinking, no, you're wrong. I don't want it to be like that. The thing that you were complaining about, you might not have preferred it, but that is the way that I wanted it. So you, of course, are going to make all the final decisions yourself. Now, when you've done this, you're going to do a 4th pass through the book on your own. And this is what I'll call the last revision. And this is very similar. It's kind of combining everything from before. You're just going to do it again. You're going to go through the whole book again. You're going to try to read it from start to finish one more time. You're going to make some changes along the way. You probably thought of some things as you've been doing it. You maybe have heard some good advice from people, but hopefully at this point there aren't so many. Hopefully there will be long stretches where you're just reading it and enjoying what you've got there and fixing typos and things like that. By now you should have a pretty good handle on what it is that you've created, and only small tweaks will be necessary. But I'll say again, if you get to a section and you find your attention drifting, or you find yourself just wanting to get through it, it's probably because there's something there that needs to be fixed. So learn to trust your gut in that regard. Maybe it needs to be cut. Maybe it just needs to be, beaten down and put into shape the way it is. And you may need to repeat this more than one more time, but hopefully as you read it, you just kind of find yourself falling in and enjoying the book that you've written. And once that is done, there is one final step here of the editing process, which is called the line edit. You've probably heard of this before, the line edit. This is when the book is what we want. It says what we want it to say, but the last thing we need to do is go through and hunt for typos. Hunt for typos. Up to this point, we've been kind of ignoring those things, fix them when we find them, but that's not our priority. You can get bogged down in making sure that you spelled every word right, even though the words themselves are not great and they don't make the book any good. So what we're doing now is you're checking for misspellings. Microsoft Word and spell check will help with this. It will not be perfect with that, because very often if you misspell a word but you put a real word in there, it's not going to catch it. I find quite often that when I write the word on, O-N, I accidentally type it as N-O, and for some reason Microsoft Word never catches that. Or if I type is, instead of is, I'll type I-S-S. I don't know why it doesn't correct that one. Maybe I made a mistake in there somewhere. But you need to be reading it yourself. Misspellings, punctuation errors. If you don't know how to use a semicolon, don't use it. I've seen this many times. And if you do know how to use it, double check, Google, make sure, is this the proper way to do that? Look for common word confusions. Here, let me give you a pet peeve of mine. The word comprise is almost always misused by people. People say, well, the United States is comprised of 50 states. No, it is not. That you're thinking of the word compose. It is composed of 50 states. The word comprise is actually backwards of that. You would say America comprises 50 states. Just a little tweak like that. But there's lots of things that people get wrong. Using the wrong weather or using the wrong to, TWO instead of TOO. Looking for things like that. Anything like that. This allows you to fix the basic stuff, and it allows kind of the big picture matters to simmer in the back of your mind. You're enjoying the process. This is good. I'm enjoying the book. Oop, missed a P there. And you type that in and you keep on going. This should be a careful, diligent process, but it also probably shouldn't take that long at this point. But I will say this, you will find a lot of typos. I have never found them all. In fact, the reason I record an audiobook version of my books is because I have found that is when I catch all the typos. I'm talking after when it's printed, like behind me. When I read the audiobook for that book there, it was already printed and sold, and it was at the church and everything else. I found 2 pages of single-space typos. Oops. And it didn't take anything to go back and change them, and I can edit it later, but it was just crazy to me that as often as I read that book, I don't know how many dozen times I've read that here book, but it was still full of errors, and so you need to be looking for those. You're trying to produce a clean copy. It's kind of like when you've been working on scratch paper, you want to rewrite everything and make a clean copy. That's essentially what the line edit is for. So that's the edit. We've got take a break, step away from the manuscript for a while, do a read through of the whole thing, making minimal changes. Then your hack and slash passes, you're fixing things, trying to get the structure and order of the book the way you want it. You've got the language pass when you're trying to refine the way that you say everything and make sure that the words are smooth and clear. Give it to beta readers. Let them tell you if there's any mistakes that you can improve. Do a final revision where you go through it one more time and read through, making your last big changes, and then you do a line edit to make sure there are no typos in it. Double periods come up an awful lot too, I've noticed. It has been said of the editing process that all writing is rewriting. And what that means is the real work of an author is not in producing a first draft. It is in taking that first draft and wrangling it to the ground and editing it until it is something usable. There's some truth to that. And I tend to think about it like this way, maybe you have too, is you say, I'm done with the book. All I've got to do now is edit it. which is hilarious because the editing process, while it is never to me as long as the drafting process, it is not a short process. It is a months-long process. For our newest book, Firebrand, we had to really rush the edit because we had a deadline that was an opportunity that opened up for us, and that was the fastest edit we've ever done. And even that took months. It's a long process. Some people will actually pay for an editor. I've never done that myself. I prefer to have complete control over the books that I write. And I'm sure that it suffers in that regard, but I'll say at the very least, you probably got a very distinctive Tyler Warner voice that comes through. But you can look into paying for an editor. I can't really help you with that. But once you finish this process, when the edit is done, you've got an actual book in your hand. The product is complete. There's some crazy guy that wrote it and handed it to you, and you made it into something that is usable, marketable, saleable, and now you pass it on to the next step. And this is a discipline. This is hard. This is the thing that most people don't do. Most people never write their book. Of those who do, a small fraction of those actually do the hard work of editing it and making it usable. And you need to go through that because, as I said at the beginning, we need your book. We need what this is. If God has called you to do this, if this is a dream that is in your heart to write, whether it's great stories that are going to inspire the church and just entertain us in a pleasing or godly way, or if you're writing theology or biography or business or motivation or whatever it is, we need it. Because if God placed it on your heart, then it must be important. Get to it. Don't let it sit there and linger on your desk anymore. That file just kind of blinking in your computer. Get down to it and finish it up. This has been Difference Makers. My name is Tyler Warner. I'm glad that you have tuned in today. I'm the pastor of Calvary Chapel in Trussville, Alabama, and we would love for you to check out ironworks.media, which is our resource network that we are building, and just you watch. One day it's going to be the premier Christian resource network for the church. Thanks again to BGTV for helping us out with this. If you want to find out more about the church I pastor, you can go to calvarychapeltrussville.com. Check out, by the way, you can pick up their Desolation of Israel and Firebrand. They're both available now. Drop it in the comments. What step of the editing process are you on in your project as you get out there and try to make a difference?